Welcome to Beyond the Syllabus, where we talk with superintendents, curriculum leaders, and education innovators who are rethinking what school can be and how it can better serve the academic and personal needs of every learner.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Syllabus. Today's conversation is going to be absolutely electric. With me today is Yolanda Conaway, the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Student Affairs at Palo Alto Unified School District. Lana's been in education for over 25 years and is the recipient of the Outstanding Leadership in Education Award from the California African American Superintendent and Administrators Association. Lana, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super excited for our conversation. I want to start all the way at the beginning, back to mini Lana. Why did you get into education originally?
Okay, well, gosh, mini Lana. Um, there are two phases to this story because education was not anything near what I was thinking as a kid growing up, and I was interested in law and I was interested in psychology, probably from too many movies, CSI. Uh, um, but but it kind of found me. I was a poor student getting ready to go to grad school, and I took some time off to earn a bit of money and ended up in an alternative ed program back in Newport News, Virginia. And it was there that I both found a passion for learning, but more importantly, found out what was missing or what I felt was missing in education, and thought that I
Mm-hmm.
had something really powerful to give students on their journey. Basically looking at my past experiences with education and understanding how some students may end up in this place where they were rejected by schools essentially. All of the students in this space were some at some point in a public school, and at some point a public school official said, you don't belong here."
Wow.
In knowing those students and getting to know them, and their stories and the trauma and the tragedies that those students have gone through that nobody probably understood, it made me want to make a difference. So instead of going to law school like I planned to get to do, I decided I was going to get a teaching credential, and that's what I've been doing ever since, and have been loving every moment of it. That feeling of making a difference in the lives of kids is just something that cannot be beat.
That's amazing. I love that. And so many people that we talk to and interview say that like education found them. And I think it's so special because it shows you how mission driven this work is for so many of us, right?
Well, it's
And
definitely not for the money.
right. Well, that's for sure. Especially relative to what would have happened at a law school. So I hear you there. But yeah, that mission is incredible, and the language that you just chose there, the word rejection, that's such a strong word, but I think a word that a lot of people feel when they think about education. Can you go deeper on like what exactly was going on in these kids' lives where they were rejected, and maybe what have you seen throughout your career as well?
Absolutely. Well, I will say one thing, and most educators know this already, and that is that school systems have been running the same way for decades and decades and decades. Traditional schools, sitting in rows, listening to the teacher talk. And when a student comes in who haven't internalized that process or don't even necessarily know that process, are at a disadvantage because they cannot work the system. So the reality is our system is built a certain way, and I always say this when I'm doing trainings, the system was not built for equity.
Hmm.
The system was built for those who know how to navigate it. And when students enter that space and they don't have the background, and they may not have the support, to navigate the system, I think what happens sometimes is they become, kind of ostracized in that space, and somehow we move away from having this conversation about how do we change systems to meet the needs of students, to how does this student assimilate in order to be able to function in this particular environment. And when students can't, oftentimes the solution is to put them in a non-public school or some private school that's made for students who are not traditional or perceived to be not traditional. So what happens, we get these institutions that have all students, who have unique challenges for sure, but they don't have the opportunity to be educated with what we would deem typically developing peers.
Hmm.
So we create inequities just by the policies and practices that we use in education. And our goal, I haven't met a single educator in my life that has not wanted the best for kids.
Yeah.
But sometimes our intentions and our actions don't always line up.
Yeah.
And when that happens, we, as educators can sometimes unintentionally cause harm or unintentionally hold students back when our sole goal is to make sure students succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, God, you just said so much good stuff there. Wow, that was great. We're gonna use some quotes from there for sure. But I wanna go to the idea of the system not meeting the needs of the student versus the student not assimilating to the system, right? I mean, my passion and my work is with the mission of creating a system that meets the needs of all students. And the answer to that is not to craft a system that is exactly one way, right? It's actually the exact opposite. It's to create a system that can be adapted in an unlimited amount of ways based
Exactly.
on the needs and makeup of a student, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
how, what do you think about that in general? And what are some programs or initiatives you've seen that have tried to meet the needs of students rather than expect students to meet the system's needs?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? Which is, the reality is we've designed schools the way they are. So that means that we can redesign them. And in part of redesigning them, we have to challenge the mission of schools. Because when we talk about the mission of schools, you will hear about academic success, which obviously are the things we should be focused on. However, from my perspective, schools need to really focus on nurturing the whole child so that we are actually raising kind, empathetic human beings, right? Who can navigate the world.
Yep.
We often, you'll learn a little bit about my district in the past. We were a very high performing district, well known both nationally and in the state for high academic achievement. But we also are known for something else that's pretty critical, and that is, we have some high suicide rates in our community, which is something that we've been working really, really hard on. And if nothing else, sends the message that schools have to be involved in more ways than just providing math, science, history, and core subjects. I think it's so important for us to make sure that we are attending to the well being of students, making sure that there is a sense of belonging, that they feel included. I always call it the wise way, which is well being, inclusion, sense of belonging, and equity. Without those things, those four things, academic achievement could either be just temporary or the only thing
Yeah.
that kids have to hold on to. So I would say in the notion of schools challenging success, it doesn't mean that we are measuring our success by how the GPAs, the average GPAs in our community, or by the number of students who get into Stanford or other prestigious colleges. It is by far, from my perspective, the number of students who say when they leave our doors that I had both a great education and I felt cared for. I felt
Mhm.
like I belonged in this space and I was included. Those are the students who leave with high self esteem, who are resilient, who are ready to go on and tackle the world. And oftentimes, we find that, students that are just solely focused on the academics are miss a huge part of what life is about. That's not to say that's all students. I want to be clear because I think academic achievement is central to our progress, both as a nation, as a community, and an individual. But what happened if we focused our attention on educators and connecting with kids in this meaningful way and
Mhm.
caring for them like they were our own, and making sure that they knew that they had a supportive network when they come to school? From my perspective, I think it will ensure that students feel like it's a place they want to be.
Yeah.
And if it's a place they wanna be, we will see our attendance rates go up, right? We won't have an issue with chronic absenteeism. We will see engagement in general go up, and we will also see academic achievement increase. So
100%.
I so there's work that we have to do, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, education and education systems shifting to meet the needs of students where there's no such thing as typical. The only
Yeah.
thing that's typical is that we are consistent about meeting the needs of individual students.
100%. And I think, the idea of the whole child and the idea of course, the academic outcomes are important, right? And some people will say that they're more important than others. Will say it's less important. That's okay. We can argue about that, right?
Yeah.
But I think the important approach is that there are so many things that feed into that, right? And I'm
Yeah.
going to throw a framework at you, that, to all my listeners, I'm sorry you've had to hear me say this like 10 times now, but it is a framework developed by a Danish psychology professor named Jan Tonesvang, and it's a 4 quadrant model that he developed, and he developed it for in the context of a clinical setting, right, in clinical psychology. But basically, it states that before you can analyze a client's phenomena, you must first understand everything about all 4 of these quadrants. And so I'll lay them out for you. The upper left quadrant is called the singular internal. The upper right quadrant is called the singular external. The bottom left quadrant is called the plural internal, and the bottom right quadrant is called the plural external. Singular internal means like your thoughts and your feelings, the things that are singular to you and only you know about, right? Other people can't see them about you. The singular external are your behaviors, your actions, the things you say, your personal relationships, the things that are still in like singular to you, but observable by those outside of you, right? The plural internal is our life, your morals, your family values, things that are
Mhm.
shared with your inner circle, but still pretty like tight knit and internal to you guys, right? And then the plural external is your system, your religion, your government, your work rules, things like that, things that are shared with a large group around you and observable from those looking in. And so the idea is you must understand comprehensively all 4 of those quadrants of the human being before you can analyze a client's phenomena. And
Mm.
I tell you about that framework to say I take that lens on education, and to say if I want to ensure the academic success of a student, I must first understand all 4 of those quadrants about them. Because at the end of the day, when they walk into school at 7:45 or 8:30, whatever time your bell rings, and they sit down at a desk, all 4 of those quadrants make up who they are as a person in that classroom. And we need to take into account and acknowledge that.
So powerful. Yes, absolutely. I actually I have a similar way of thinking. You've probably heard the term educators use often around the conditions for learning.
Mm-hmm.
I've shifted that to the conditions for thriving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because without those basic conditions, the learning can't happen. So when we talk about the essential, need for relationships, the essential need for safety, and these components that we don't measure as an education system, right? We just assume that how we measure our success is by the grade, right? By the number of students who can pass statewide assessments. That's a good measure, and I don't want to make I want to make sure I don't send the message that these critical assessments and measurement is not important. What I'm trying to say is that when we think about the conditions that students really need to thrive, both in school and beyond, we are not talking about a grade. We are not talking about the selection of a college. What we are talking about is how do we make students feel seen and valued? And because when students feel that way, that they feel that they are accepted in that environment, they open up. They lose the defensiveness, right? And they become vulnerable in that space and willing to learn and willing to listen in these really kind of meaningful ways. So I will say, we continue to do what we've done for generations, which is build schools on this framework of efficiency, standardization, control, rather than curiosity, joy, love, care, those things that are so important for human functioning. I think we lose such a great opportunity for all students to learn, because we obviously have those students who will, um, like I said, be able to navigate that space. And these are the students that often there was research done, around those students who had the perception that they needed more control from the adults in the space. The interesting thing about those findings were those students who did exceptionally well in the environment perceived that control as being positive.
Yeah.
Those students who were challenged in the environment felt like, "No, there's too much control. I need to have some agency and some control, over how this space, works with me and for me, in this environment." So,
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to really think about how we do schools today. And some schools are doing a really, really great job of focusing on things like project-based learning, doing these really creative things around robotics and coding rather than just sit and get. I think those are the schools that are getting much higher achievement, particularly for its marginalized population.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important question to ask is like, what's the goal, right? Like, you started to say it. Like, is the goal a score on one state test one time a year? Is the goal a well-rounded, empathetic, curious person? I mean,
Yeah,
personally, my goal is the latter, right? Like,
absolutely.
I think that there's a fundamental misalignment when it comes to like the end goal, and I
Absolutely.
think before we can agree and maybe evolve a little bit in that respect, we're going to be really misaligned when it comes to the
Mhm.
approach, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think that's a super important conversation, and that leads me into my next question here, which is, you're very, very well known and respected for your work in your district around MTSS and the way that you guys have rolled that out district wide. Can you talk about kind of why MTSS is important and how that's played out at Palo Alto?
Absolutely. So, I mean, for those folks who don't know that educational term, it's multi-tiered systems of support. And that work is deeply grounded in our notion that demographics should not predict outcomes.
Mm.
And part of how we have defined, that term equity that's getting so much tension these days is that we're ensuring that the system is working for students in a way that both provides support and provides excellence and rigor. Because oftentimes when we talk about this work, people see it as a zero sum game where if we're focused on those kids who are not doing, as well, somehow another group would be losing something. So we've really grounded this work on making sure that students have the supports that they need, no matter where they are, what group they're in, or what demographic. So our work around equity is around the data, and when the data says that there's a particular student, not just a group, but a particular student who is not doing well, that we are very intentional about having a plan for that student. So we've adopted a system in our it's called Student Success through Panorama, and we are able to look across the board at all of those measures that are important in school, from social emotional learning to attendance, to state assessments to grades, and how those things are what picture those items are painting, so we can identify students who may need some early intervention, or students who have fallen through the cracks and have not received intervention. So we are continuously building up that system so that there's not a single child in our district who is struggling, who has not had an opportunity to receive support specific to what that particular
Mhm.
need is. And I will have to say, sometimes, when you roll out an initiative like this, you get the how are we going to do this? It takes too much time, there's too much training, or I don't have the skills. So our work has really been around ensuring that we have embedded supports for our teachers who want to use that strategy. But here's where the kicker is, that we are not absolving our educators of the responsibility for strong tier one instruction. That means the core instruction has to be solid. And when that core instruction is solid, we can efficiently say we rule out instruction as the issue. The student may have a unique concern that we have to address, and then try to approach that from what are the strategies and kind of responses that we have to engage in with the student. But not only implement these things, but measure to see if they're working. And
Yeah.
if they're not working, we have an opportunity to course correct and identify some specific things that we can do to help the student along.
Yeah.
We're still in the process. We're still building. We're still growing in this area. Capacity building is still, something that we're working on. But I believe that the stronger that we get in our multi-tiered systems of supports, that's the central work of supporting students in need, and also central to our goal of demographics not predicting outcomes.
Yeah, I love that line. Demographics not predicting outcomes. And I
Yeah.
think the important piece you highlighted too, obviously the approach is, the framework is used around the country. A lot of people have tools for it and implementations for it. I think where a lot of districts fall short is in measuring the efficacy of those approaches and then taking action if they see that that's not working, right?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
it almost feels like that's always like the last piece of the puzzle when I would think like it has to be like the first piece of the puzzle, you know?
Right, right.
So let me throw that back at you and ask, how are you guys measuring the efficacy of it, or is that something you're still figuring out?
No, no, we definitely are. So there are a couple of metrics that we've identified that's clear, and it may help to know that we have identified 5 focus areas for our entire district. Our
Okay.
All of our priorities are built around these 5 priorities. With MTSS being one that's under our inclusion, safety, belonging. Um, and part of that is what are we expecting to see as a result of that? Well, I think the number one thing is that we're building capacity of our educators. So if our educators are saying we feel more confident in meeting the needs of students when that first tier instruction is not being effective, we have both a plan, an execution strategy, and we have people that feel capable of actually executing that strategy and measuring the outcomes. Now, are we 100% there? No, because this is not work that you just say we're done and rubber stamp it. This is work that we continually try to improve on, and focus on that continuous improvement as we go. So, um, at the end of the day, if we have a student who enters, this MTSS framework with a challenge, in 6 weeks we would expect to see some improvement.
Yeah.
And if in 6 weeks we don't, we shift something.
Yep.
And in 8 weeks, if we don't see something, we're shifting something again, and we're keeping, our eye on that data point to make sure that there's continuous improvement.
I love it.
Because oftentimes, I'm sure you know this, sometimes when we put interventions in place, we just put the intervention in place and keep doing it with
Yeah.
no real understanding of how it's impacting the student's outcome.
Yep.
So we're getting better at that every day.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I see, I'm super blessed to work with districts across the country and get to travel and spend time with them. And one of the things I see a ton of is like they have they do a good job of identifying when a student has entered maybe tier two, tier three, so on and so forth, and identified a student that needs some intervention. But
Mhm.
the path of going from intervention back out of it is not always super clear. And so I
Absolutely.
love the framework of 6 weeks. We change something. If at 8 weeks it's not working, we change something again. Like you got to figure it out one way or another, right? Tier
Absolutely.
two and tier three doesn't exist so that a kid can live their K-12 career as a tier three student, right? That's
Exactly.
not that's not what that's supposed to be.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think that's a really good framework. And the MTSS again, obviously something that super super powerful framework. And yeah, super excited to hear how you guys are using it.
Yep.
I want to circle back to one thing you mentioned, and obviously, as you said, it's a super critical topic, but mental health at your district, right? There was an article where it was covering your decision to forego an external partnership and focus on empowering internal staff and building sustainable internal processes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. We've come a long way in our, kind of our mental health initiatives. Not only have we expanded our mental health supports, we've expanded supports for educators as well. So our system involves supporting both students and educators, and also providing, some supports for families as well with our, parent education training. So we feel like we it was necessary for us to hit every layer of our stakeholder group, because this is not a problem to be solved by one institution or one group or one organization. It requires an entire community. So initially, the way we approach it, and this is the way most schools approach it, you hire, someone to come in, or you partner with a mental health group for them to come in and provide that support. And then we started to really listen to the students who said, we don't know these people. How can you have an effective, relationship from a therapy or counseling perspective if there's no trust? There's no
Hmm.
trust built. These are strangers. So, one of the conversations that we were having internally as an organization is, how do we both strengthen the system and also reduce stigma and open up the opportunity for stronger, deeper connections and relationships with the adults? So we quickly moved out our external partners, which did garner some conversation, obviously, because there was a fear that we would not be able to build that infrastructure within our own walls. And amazingly enough, when we started to move away from those external partnerships and build internally, the number of highly qualified, just amazing mental health professionals that we've been able to find in a really short amount of time
Mhm.
has been just astronomical.
That's awesome.
It's changed the way we looked at mental health. We talk about mental health all of the time. Have we solved the mental health crisis? Absolutely not. Well, we
Yeah.
we still have that, right? But we know that every single year when we revisit, our approach, we're looking at ways to improve our mental health supports. So right now we have mental health associates at every single site, but we have those in addition to our psychologists, our counselors, our student and family engagement specialists, all of these individuals who can help us create an ecosystem of care that's not just about, come to school, get your academics, and go home. This is about come to school, feel good about yourself, and know you have a place to go when you need help. And each year we're looking at student data to try to identify what areas we can improve in.
Mhm.
There's nothing like listening to students give you feedback on the
Yeah.
things you think are awesome.
Yep.
It's a real reality check. Like we as adults, we may think it's amazing, and kids are like, "Nah, you missed the mark on that one." I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Yep. We hear it all the time. I mean, it's kids
Absolutely.
are our number one source of feedback for sure.
Absolutely,
And sometimes
absolutely.
it's pretty funny to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you know what? Their feedback leads us to a better place.
for sure.
We have learned so much from doing listening sessions with students,
Oh yeah.
talking about mental health, and they have said, "Here's the most recent feedback we've received." It's like we have these really great wellness centers in our school, students shared that perhaps it has created a situation where rather than teachers spending more time talking to kids, they send students to what they know and where they know they will get that support. So students may be feeling a little bit of a disconnect in terms of deeper connections with their teacher because we do have other providers. And it's
Mhm.
not because our teachers don't care. It's because now we've got an expert who can talk to you. Why settle for me when you can go to someone who really knows how to
Yep.
help you?
Yep.
But it has raised a question on how do we move this back to the center to make sure that students feel very connected to the teachers that they see every single day, in addition to having the supports of the wellness center and the mental health therapist in the environment.
Yeah.
So I think we all know that that's the work we need to do. Just figuring out, how to balance that is the key.
Yeah, and I think the important piece there to reiterate is the sense of belonging for students, right? A sense of resonation for students. I mean, part of our work, we build around a character strengths framework that research and studies have shown builds comfort for students in the classroom, right? And
Absolutely.
the kind of logical argument there is like why that's embedded in the work that we do is because it's not directly tied to performance, but you know what is tied to performance? A student's sense of comfort in a classroom. So if
Absolutely.
we can increase a student's sense of comfort in a classroom, if we can increase the rate that they're resonating with material that's being put in front of them, then indirectly we're going to boost that academic performance, which is part of
Absolutely.
what you were talking about before, right? Which is it's not that academic performance isn't important, but I think we need to acknowledge some of the pieces that feed into it.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. So, Lana, tell me, what is like your grand dream of education? Like if you like break all norms, break all things that we know to be true today in 500 years in the world of aliens, like what does education look like?
That is a great question. Actually, I spend a lot of time thinking about that question even in my work as I try to, create systems that support students with disabilities, our LGBTQ youth, our marginalized groups. What we know is that the system does not always work, for students, as I said earlier. So the idea would be that we strip this notion away that we have to operate the exact same way year after year, day after day, in terms of what our expectations are for students. We can maintain rigor, we can maintain, high student outcomes, but make the environment more organic.
Yeah.
I've always struggled with schools where we teach math, just as a worksheet or math in the context of textbook work, rather than math applied to a real world problem. Because if we're really wanting to prepare students for their future, they have to engage in some authentic learning. And that authentic learning requires them to tackle some real world problems.
Hmm.
And I think the more, the more educators can bring in real life into the walls of the classroom, and kind of move away from the textbook and move away from, the traditional way of learning, kids will be more engaged. They will love learning because it's they can connect it to something that they live through every day of their lives. And particularly when we talk about, our marginalized youth, in particular, where they come into spaces, that are very traditional, and in many cases, something that they struggle with navigating. It's important for us to recognize that culture matters and make sure that, it doesn't become a flashpoint or a debated issue, but it becomes this opportunity to share across the school, across the classroom, what culture can mean for a space like a classroom, and how important those differences are, so that we learn to value those differences in a way where any student who comes on campus can feel like they belong because differences are okay.
Yeah.
And just like much of the world, the education system is the same way, where there's, students are labeled, they're high performing, they're low performing, they're this or that, or they're in this reading group or that reading group. Why not just have a system that supports all students no matter where they are on the spectrum?
Yep.
Where part of the educational system is to embed supports so that students have those readily available. So those who need to be challenged are challenged at a high level, but those who are struggling and need the support also have that. So that students can find their way, to higher and higher levels of thriving. I was going to say achievement, but it's more than just achievement. It is, how do we make sure students feel good about themselves?
Yeah.
And I talk to way too many students who are feeling like I don't belong here. This place was not meant for me.
Hmm.
And those are the students that become disconnected from education very, very early on. And
Yeah.
what we know is that students enter, preschool and kindergarten so happy about learning, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
happy to come
Oh
to
yeah. I
school.
remember it.
Yes. And then by the middle school, we see that dropping a bit. And then
Yeah.
by the high school, we see it dropping more. And here's what I've learned. Because at the elementary levels, teachers are really focused on teaching students, not teaching subjects.
Hmm.
And if we can adopt that mentality that we are molding human beings, either giving hope or stealing it, or ensuring that students thrive or creating barriers for thriving, we have a huge responsibility as educators. And if yeah, as an education system, we can all adopt that mentality that what we do today matters for students tomorrow. I think we can really, start to shift our thinking about how we educate students.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I always say, because I was that kid, like I disconnected from school. I was bored. I didn't understand the real world purpose of why we were doing what we were doing. I thought it was a really poorly built system. And
Mhm.
I always say, like, why does it get so serious when you go from like fifth to sixth grade? Like, what
It
happened?
does.
You
I
know,
hear that I hear
fifth
that a
grade
lot.
was fun and sixth grade was like terror.
Well, I can tell you what 6th grade teachers would say. It's like, "We've gotta prepare you for high school."
Right.
So it's always preparing for that next thing. And I
Yeah.
have to tell you, even in preschool these days, it's getting so academic. Like, there's
Wow.
there's less focus on play. There's more focus on, making sure kids are, reading by the time they get to kindergarten. And I wanted to say, just let them play. You can
Yeah.
learn through play. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean that there's not an academic structure to that, but it just means that students enjoy finding their interest and their passions.
Yeah.
And what happens sometimes by the time we get, to middle school and high school, students are not feeling that they are tapping into what they're passionate about anymore.
Hmm.
It's like, I have to do this because I have to do this, not because I enjoy and love doing this.
Yeah.
So we just got to figure out ways to make learning more interesting, more fun.
Yeah, listen, I completely agree, and 15-year-old Aiden was saying the same thing. I was like, this has got to be more fun, because at the end of the day, like I always had such good relationships with my teachers. I loved learning, like I loved the idea of it, but the execution just didn't live up to that. It
Absolutely.
was not fun. It was not engaging, and I think the notion that we all need to learn the same thing at the same time in the same way is archaic, right? And as
Absolutely.
you said, like the kids who need to be challenged, we need to challenge them, and the kids who need some support, we need to support them, and we need to do all of that in a way that is relevant and meaningful to each
Absolutely.
individual person.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
what happens oftentimes though, I have to say that sometimes in the best, educators approach these things in the best interests of students and for example, building in supports,
Hmm.
but it becomes stigmatized
Yeah.
because of the way we do it. It's like, okay, you're those kids, so you go over here. You're a student with a disability, so that's your teacher, and you go over here, rather than creating this inclusive system where all students have the capacity to function in it. That doesn't mean that we don't create these opportunities for really targeted support and learning. But we start to label and categorize students really, really early in the game.
Yeah.
And once you do that, we've already put students on a pathway that they may not ever be able to get off of.
Yeah.
So it's important to make sure that the way we operate the system is to maximize students' potential, not to label them and peg them in a certain lane.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. I think that's a good way to wrap up our conversation here. Lana, thank you so much for joining me. Any final shout out to the community? Where can people find you? Where can people find Palo Alto?
Yeah, absolutely. Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, everybody knows how wonderful this space is. We are, trying to catch up with the times with our AI work, because we are Silicon Valley. You can find me anywhere. If you Google me, you'll see, where to get in touch with me. And I'm always interested in talking to educators, about this important work. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
I love it. Well, Lana, thanks you so much again for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Got an idea, a story, or a question about what we discussed today? We'd love to hear from you. To learn more about Unique Learn, follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube and visit uniquelearn.co.